What if AI slop isn't a mistake or an unintended consequence or a side effect of this mass adoption of AI? What if it is actually the primary thing that we will use AI to do, and it is the primary cultural object of this moment in history? I'm not talking about the AIs that they're using to scan cancer cells to figure out what's going on there. That's a different technology to me. I'm talking about the generative AIs that you are probably seeing in your day-to-day cultural life. The AIs that are trying to persuade you of things, describe things to you, are being used by other people to get your attention and keep it and monetize it. And that's an important distinction to make because they've gotten away with using this massive umbrella term that sort of obscures what's actually being created. When people talk about using AI to replace types of activity or labor that are about talking to other humans, doing things for and with other humans, what they're proposing is not increased efficiency. What they're proposing is increased legibility. And the difference there is that when you start counting something, counting a certain output, if you're paying someone by the hour versus by the unit produced, what you start to assess by begins to shift the way that the system works. We saw this with standardized testing in American schools. If you're Gen Z or Gen Alpha, you experience that phenomenon of people teaching to the test, which literally changed, the ways that you understood the world, the ways that people learned how to read. In your workplace, you probably experience this incentive structure too, where people are working to accomplish a certain number, whatever that number is attached to, and it bears some resemblance to the actual thing you're doing, but often that goal will not be precisely exactly connected to every facet of your job. And a lot of the most important work that happens in this society or any society is the stuff that sort of falls through the cracks of the spreadsheet. But we need to make spreadsheets, in order to assess people, in order to make sure resources are allocated. And so there's always been this sort of balance between legibility, which is the ability to, communicate to a wider group of people, to make it make sense within an organization, and actual on the ground precision of doing stuff, of being adaptable, flexible, improvising, which when your job is talking to people, whether it is customer service, whether you're a reporter, whether you're a teacher, it's all about the moment-to-moment thing. And the thing about AI, large language models, whatever it might be, is they are golems built out of data. So they are built essentially out of spreadsheets that people made in the past. They're built out of that bird's eye view perspective on whatever the job is. So if you have an AI be a teacher, what that AI will excel at is doing everything exactly by the book, because the AI has nothing in it but the book. And so the reason why people empower the people who write the books that, people have to teach from or work from or kind of set the metrics that people have to meet, the reason they love AI isn't that it's better at doing those jobs. It's that it does them more legibly. So A, the numbers look better and people think, oh, that must be better because they only think about the numbers. And then B, they're more controllable. And the book I've been thinking about a lot is this one by James C. Scott, Seeing Like a State, which is kind of a classic, but he has this one example where he's talking about these forests in Germany back in the 1800s. And the old school forests look like this. It was all types of plants, all types of trees, bushes, animals, but they're we're using the forest for lumber, so we want to have the best possible trees to chop down and make wood from. And they did it by legibility, right? So they wanted the same age in certain plots so that they could know how much wood they'd yield. They wanted things that would be easy to water and plant and trim. And so they made all these forests that looked like this. They looked like these long hallways of trees, all planted in a grid, all very easy to manage and prune. But within a few decades, the whole forest and all the trees started to die and they weren't getting any wood anymore. And it was because they over-optimized for that legible outcome of having all the trees planted in a row, of having a predictable harvest and yield. And they forgot to realize that the way a forest really works is you need all those other plants to move the nutrients through the soil. They built this system of legibility, of assessing it, checking it, optimizing it. And then that got its own inertia and its own momentum, and it prevented them from actually seeing what was happening in the forests on the ground. And if we build AI in such a way that we're turning culture or the world or the economy into a planned forest like that, it's not going to be sustainable. In many ways, it's already not. Your platforms are full of slop, but what's most profitable to them and what guarantees their power most in the short term is to make that planned forest, is to reduce the amount of diversity and value happening in online cultural spaces. And the best way to do that is through slop. which is hyperlegible, which is that perfectly planted row of trees in addition to whatever else it is. Seeing it that way isn't to say all AI is automatically bad or like you shouldn't be allowed to plant trees in a straight line if you want to. It's just to say that you can't like overcorrect in that direction. Like there needs to be a balance. And one of the threats of this technology and the ways that slop is being used is to overcorrect and to make it so that there will be no balance, so that we are building a system that in the future will just continue to produce these same outcomes of hyperlegibility until it becomes a language that only they can read and that we are left out of. It will be so legible to the people on top and the computers and the AIs that it will not at all resemble what you and I actually speak to one another. And that's when we get into, a series of dangers, an unsustainable system, and all types of issues. And that's why memes and posts that poke fun at slop, that point out the ways in which it is not natural, in which it doesn't really reflect the way we do things or interact with each other, little acts of resistance against putting the AI or the hyperlegibility into our everyday lives, that stuff is important because it helps to do that balancing act. It helps teach people what this tech can do, what this tech might do to them in the future, and how they themselves can sort of assert their own presence and assert their own nuance and complexity and say, it isn't just about the number or the outcome. It's about the way things happen and the day-to-day, the improvisation, the moment to moment.